Like and subscribe to PalsFundamentals on YouTube for more videos like this.
Okay.
This is Regional News Report for Wednesday, March 26th, 2025. We will be focusing on recent news from Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands, drawing directly from available reports with no opinions or speculation.
Sounds good.
So we'll be looking at things like policing, earthquakes, and some interesting discussions around education in Iceland.
Interesting.
For Greenland, there's a lot going on with U.S. relations and some pretty serious housing challenges.
I'm ready.
And then we wrap up with infrastructure progress, labor agreements, and even some thoughts on language and technology in the Faroe Islands.
Fascinating stuff. Let's jump in.
Okay, let's head over to Iceland first.
All right.
The Minister of Justice there just announced funding for 50 new police officer positions.
Wow, 50. That's a significant increase.
Yeah. And it's directly tied to the need to combat organized crime and gang violence, which seem to be on the rise.
I see. So they're beefing up the police force to tackle this.
Exactly. And they're actively trying to recruit more people into police training with an application deadline of March 31st. So if you're in Iceland and considering a career in law enforcement,
Now's the time.
right. One thing that stood out in the reports is the idea that increasing police numbers could actually improve the working environment for officers.
That makes sense. More hands on deck can mean a more manageable workload, less stress, and potentially a safer environment overall.
And safer for everyone involved.
Absolutely.
Especially when we look at the reports coming out of Northeast Iceland, the drug scene there is becoming increasingly violent with more weapons being carried. The police have actually had to add metal detectors to their standard equipment in response.
That's a pretty clear indicator of the escalating danger.
Yeah. There was even an incident where an officer was threatened with a knife at close range during an arrest.
Wow.
It really highlights the risks they're facing.
It certainly does.
And speaking of risky situations, there was a pretty disturbing report from Reykjavik. A 15-year-old boy was arrested for attacking, and get this, biting police officers.
Biting.
Yeah, biting. Apparently, he was also found with drugs.
That's really concerning. A 15-year-old engaging in such violence and involved with drugs. It's a worrying combination.
It is. Child protection authorities and the boy's parents were contacted. The officer who was bitten had visible injuries.
I hope the officer is okay. This incident raises a lot of questions. Was this an isolated case, or is it indicative of a larger problem?
It does make you wonder, doesn't it?
What's being done to address youth crime and drug use in Reykjavik?
Yeah, hopefully we'll see some answers to these questions soon.
Absolutely.
Now, moving away from social issues to actual tremors.
Literally.
Yes, literally. There's been some earthquake activity in Iceland. An earthquake swarm started north of Húsavík yesterday afternoon.
How many earthquakes are we talking about?
Around 45 were recorded. Most were relatively minor, between magnitudes 1 and 2.
Okay, so not too strong then.
No, not strong enough to be felt in populated areas, thankfully. The largest was a 2.4.
Still, 45 earthquakes in a swarm. That's a lot of shaking going on.
It is. But apparently these swarms are pretty common in the Chernys fracture zone. It's a transform fault where tectonic plates are grinding against each other.
I see. So this is just the Earth doing its thing, essentially.
Pretty much. It's a good reminder that Iceland is in a very geologically active region.
Right. Constant monitoring is key to anticipating potential larger events.
And we did see another swarm just over the weekend, west of Kopasker, so the Earth is definitely restless in Iceland at the moment.
Interesting. So from shaking ground to shifting populations, what's the latest on that?
Well, 2024 saw a record high in emigration from Iceland. 15,745 people left the country, a significant increase from 14,771 in 2023.
Wow. That's a pretty big jump.
It is, though immigration remained quite high at 19,789, the third highest on record. Still, it was lower than in 2023 and 2022.
So more people are leaving than coming in now. Do we know where they're going?
Denmark was the most popular destination for Icelanders leaving the country. And interestingly, it was also the main country of origin for Icelandic citizens returning.
So a lot of back and forth between Iceland and Denmark.
Yeah, it seems so. Now, for non-Icelandic citizens, Poland was the primary destination for those emigrating, and also the largest source country for those coming to Iceland.
And I wonder what's driving these migration patterns.
It's a good question. Maybe economic opportunities, cultural ties, or a combination of factors.
It's certainly worth investigating further.
One more interesting tidbit, the modal age for both emigrants and immigrants was 25 years old.
So young adults are leading the way in these population movements.
It seems so.
Okay, so we've got people moving in and out of Iceland, and then there's also movement within the country itself.
Exactly. When we look at internal migration patterns, the capital region had the largest net gain in residents.
Makes sense. The capital usually attracts people.
Right. But on the other hand, the southwest region experienced the biggest net loss of residents, largely due to people moving away from Grindavik.
Grindavik. That's the town near the recent volcanic eruptions, right?
Yes, that's right. So those eruptions are likely a major factor in those internal shifts.
Makes sense. People moving away from potential danger zones.
Okay, let's finish up Iceland with a look at education. There's been some interesting discussion around student behavior and discipline. The head teacher of Skóli pointed out that experienced teachers are seeing a real difference in students now compared to 20 years ago.
What kind of difference?
Well, they're noticing that many kids are starting school without a solid understanding of boundaries. And this head teacher, along with some preschool teachers, has said that student behavior has generally gotten worse over the past 2 decades.
That's concerning. I wonder what's causing this shift.
It's not entirely clear. Some are suggesting that it reflects a broader decline in discipline in Icelandic society as a whole.
That's a pretty sweeping statement.
It is. But there's a strong emphasis on the role of parents in all of this. Teachers are urging parents to be more active in setting boundaries for their kids, teaching them about order, structure, and routine.
Makes sense. Those are important life skills that start at home.
Exactly.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
All right, let's shift our focus now to Greenland.
Sounds good. What's happening there?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about U.S. relations recently, specifically the planned visit by U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance.
What's the latest on that?
He and his wife were initially scheduled to visit Nuuk and Sisimiut, but those plans have been canceled. Now they'll only be visiting Pacific Space Base.
Oh, interesting. Pacific is a U.S. military installation, right?
Yes. Vice President Vance said on social media that he wants to see things for himself in Greenland. He also made some comments about Greenland's security, stating that many countries have threatened Greenland and other countries.
What else did he say?
He expressed the view that Denmark has ignored Greenland for far too long and believes this is a bad thing for both Greenland's security and global security.
So he's putting a spotlight on Greenland's strategic importance, suggesting Denmark isn't doing enough to protect it.
Yeah, that's certainly one interpretation.
This revised visit plan, focusing solely on Pacific, a U.S. military base, definitely sends a message.
It does. And his comments about Denmark's role in all this are likely to stir some debate.
I imagine so.
Yeah.
What has the reaction been in Greenland?
Well, Akulu Jeremiason, the chairman of the Adaset Party, actually expressed relief that the U.S. officials will only be visiting Pacific.
Relief. Why is that?
He said that as the U.S. is responsible for the base, their visits and considerations for upgrades are welcome. But he also cautioned against visits from other countries before a new government is formed in Greenland to avoid any potential influence on negotiations.
So he's being cautious about external interference during this sensitive period of government formation.
Exactly. He sees the lack of broader visits in the absence of a government as a good thing and stressed the importance of following proper protocols once a chairman is appointed.
Sensible approach.
He even said, and I quote, "Visitors should act like grown-up people."
I see his point.
He also criticized the back and forth regarding who from the U.S. was planning to visit, saying their political leaders are not to be relied upon and that their policies are changeable. He expressed concern that these actions from U.S. representatives are creating confusion and hopes for a resolution that aligns with their shared interests and what he called proper conduct.
So, bit of frustration there with the way things have been handled from the U.S. side.
Yes. And it's worth noting that other political leaders in Greenland haven't commented on this situation yet.
Maybe they're taking a wait-and-see approach.
Could be. Meanwhile, over in Denmark, Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen has reacted positively to the revised U.S. visit plans. Yeah, he called the cancellation of the community visits very positive and said the Pacific visit is acceptable. He also dismissed any claims that the new plans increase pressure on Denmark as spin, saying it's actually a de-escalation.
So he's framing this as a positive development and downplaying any tension between Denmark and the U.S. over Greenland.
Exactly. Remember, both the acting premier of Greenland, Knut Bjergjæd, and Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen had previously criticized the initially planned broader visit.
So this change of plan is likely seen as a way to smooth things over.
Likely. Danish Defense Minister Troels Lund Poulsen even commented that respecting Greenland's wishes during their government formation negotiations is wise.
It seems Denmark is trying to tread carefully here.
And speaking of careful, there was an interesting report about the Greenlandic dogsled organization, KNQK.
What about them?
They drafted an invitation for a U.S. minister, the defense minister, to attend a race, but the letter was never sent. They said they sent a draft to the Department of Culture, but were told the self-government couldn't send it, so they dropped it.
That's a shame. It would have been interesting to see a U.S. minister at a dog sled race.
Yeah, it would have. Apparently, the reason for the invitation was to seek U.S. defense assistance with helicopters to transport dogs, sleds, and drivers to Sisimiut for the Avanatak Kimissursua race.
Wow. That's quite a logistical challenge.
It is. KNQK said they acted in good faith seeking this support.
I can see their point. They were just trying to make the race happen.
Okay, ready for one more twist in this Greenland saga.
Hit me with it.
Danish politician Rasmus Jarlov is calling for the U.S. consulate in Nuuk to be closed.
Closed. Even after the changes to the vice president's visit.
Yeah, he's saying the consulate undermines Greenlandic society and played a major role in the initial broader visit plan.
That's a pretty strong stance.
It is. He argues that the consulate hasn't fulfilled its purpose of creating positive business and tourism contacts that would benefit Greenland and is instead very openly working against Greenland and Denmark.
That's a serious accusation.
He even compared the U.S. consulate to the Russian embassy in Copenhagen, suggesting the U.S. consulate is more actively working against Greenland and Denmark's interests.
He's not pulling any punches.
No, he's not. But he did emphasize that any decision to close the consulate should be made in close cooperation with the Greenland self-government.
So he's respecting Greenland's autonomy in this matter.
Yes. He's adamant that Denmark and Greenland should act together on this.
It's a complex situation with a lot of different perspectives.
Definitely. Now, before we leave Greenland, let's touch on the housing situation. There was a voter meeting in Ilulissat recently where housing shortages and renovations were a big topic of discussion.
Okay. What were the key points?
A resident from Qaanaaq raised a good question. Who's responsible for all the rundown buildings in the municipality?
It's a valid question. Someone has to take responsibility for these issues.
Eric Lange from the CMET party suggested transferring municipal housing to tenants while the municipality focuses on building new units.
Interesting. So get people into those existing houses and then build new ones.
Yeah, his reasoning was that municipally owned housing just becomes more expensive over time.
Okay, I can see that.
Then Jens Nepatuk from Nalarak blamed the lack of maintenance on the recent municipal merger.
Ah, so he's saying the bigger municipality isn't as effective in managing these things.
Yeah, and he pointed out that there hasn't been much construction in settlements for years.
I wonder why that is.
Not sure, but he's calling for making it easier for people to build their own homes and settlements.
Empowering individuals to take charge of their own housing needs.
Right. He mentioned that Nalarak is working to make the 95-to-5 scheme more accessible.
I'm not familiar with that scheme. What is it?
It's a financing scheme that can help people build their own homes.
Okay, so trying to make it easier for people to get the financial support they need to build.
Lars Erik Gabrielsen, also from Sianot, agreed that maintenance is crucial, but stressed that new construction needs to be prioritized because of the high costs.
It's a tough balancing act.
Absolutely. Then, Knud Kleeman from Adasup pointed out that some settlements that were overlooked in the past are finally starting to see some new construction, which started about 4 years ago.
That's good news for those communities.
It is. He also mentioned there's ongoing cooperation with INIAS on both renovations and construction.
INAS.
They're a construction and civil engineering company.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's at least some progress happening on the housing front.
Yes, but there are still a lot of challenges. Lena Revin Davidson from Democratic proposed focusing on new construction instead of spending so much on constant repairs.
That makes sense. Why keep pouring money into old, inefficient buildings? You can build new, energy-efficient ones.
Right. She also stressed that the housing shortage is a big issue in Evenimata Communia, including in the settlements. She highlighted the fact that there are 744 homeless individuals in the municipality.
That's a significant number.
It is. And finally, Bent B. Christensen from Inuit Adequatijit suggested updating legislation on tenants' rights to make it easier for municipal councils to take charge of rental housing maintenance.
So different approaches, but all focused on trying to improve the housing situation.
Exactly. Okay, ready to wrap things up with the Faroe Islands.
Let's do it.
Starting with infrastructure, there's some good news. The Dalstunnilin, The tunnel to Dalur is expected to be completed this year.
That's great news.
It is. There's a request for an additional 28 million kroner for the project, which will go to the Faroes Parliament soon.
Ah, so they need a bit more funding to finish it up.
Yeah, it happens. Landsverk, the public works organization, had said earlier that they needed an extra 25 to 30 million kroner and had requested this supplementary funding.
And if they get it,
If they get it, people will be driving between Husavik and Dalur by the end of the year.
that's exciting.
It is. The tunnel work began in 2021, and they broke through in November 2023. It's 2 kilometers and 200 meters long.
Not a short tunnel at all.
No, the total cost is estimated to be around 180 million kroner.
Big project.
Big project, big impact.
For sure. New infrastructure can really open up opportunities for communities.
Absolutely. Now, switching gears to healthcare, there are some ongoing issues at the medical center in Klaksvik.
What kind of issues?
Patient safety concerns, especially regarding addictive medication, are still a big problem.
Oh, that's not good.
No, it's not. The chief medical officer did a follow-up inspection on January 20th and identified major and significant problems for patient safety.
That's the second highest level of concern.
Right, and an order that was issued back in July of last year is still in effect. The chief medical officer will continue to monitor the facility, which is run by the municipal doctor, Hannes Alogvith.
Okay. What exactly are the concerns?
The main issue is the lack of treatment plans for patients receiving potentially addictive medication.
So they're not following proper procedures for prescribing and managing these medications.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. It's a serious risk to patient safety. Apparently, they haven't been following the guidelines for prescribing these types of medications.
I see.
There have been some improvements, like more emphasis on driving restrictions related to treatment, but these key issues remain.
So the July order hasn't been fully implemented.
No, it hasn't. And even hygiene, things like using cloth towels, was mentioned as a problem.
That doesn't sound good.
No, it doesn't. The chief medical officer expects the medical center to address these issues before the next inspection and offered their assistance.
Hopefully they take that assistance and make the necessary changes.
Yeah, this has been going on for a while. Inspections have been happening since 2017 with support from Denmark.
So it's a persistent problem.
Unfortunately, yes. The municipal doctor, Hannes Alog, declined to comment on the chief medical officer's report.
Not a good sign.
Now, on a more positive note, there's news about a new labor agreement in the Faroe Islands.
Oh, good. What's the agreement about?
It's between the Kommunala Arbeidsgiverfélagi, KAF, which is the Municipal Employers Association, and Helsehjälparfélagi, the Health Workers Union.
Okay, so a new agreement for healthcare workers.
Exactly. It's a one-year agreement, and a key point in the negotiations was the demand for overtime pay after an 8-hour workday.
Makes sense. People deserve to be compensated for working extra hours.
Right. And they also agreed to put aside the issue of emergency preparedness during strikes, at least for now.
That's probably a good idea to avoid things getting too heated.
I agree. So under this agreement, overtime pay will be 50% extra after 8 hours. This is specifically designed to encourage staff to work extra in elderly care.
That's interesting. So they're targeting this extra pay to address a specific need in the healthcare system.
Right. There's also a 4.75% salary increase across the board, retroactive to October 1st of last year.
Not bad at all.
No, not bad. And they've also increased allowances for summer and holiday camps.
That's good news for people working at those camps.
It is. One last thing to note is that the agreement doesn't mention any exceptions for emergency preparedness during strikes.
So that issue is still up in the air.
Yes, for now.
Interesting.
Now, one last piece of news from the Faroe Islands about language and technology.
Okay, go on.
Tori Slatali, an ICT consultant, spoke on Mother Language Day, which had the theme, "That's what machine translation knows."
Etchy theme.
He expressed some doubts about the current usefulness of machine translation for the Faroes language.
Why is that?
I think it has to do with the fact that Faroes is a smaller language with less data available to train machine translation systems.
Oh, that makes sense.
But he's optimistic about future developments, believing that technology will eventually provide valuable linguistic tools for Faroes.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. For now, though, he thinks dictionaries shouldn't be replaced just yet.
It's all about finding the right balance between traditional resources and new technology.
So, to recap this regional news report, we covered a lot of ground today. In Iceland, we talked about increased police funding to combat crime, the recent earthquake activity, record emigration figures, and the discussion around discipline in schools.
A lot going on there.
Yes, indeed. In Greenland, the main focus was on the revised U.S. vice president's visit, which is now limited to the Pituffik military base.
And we can't forget those ongoing debates about housing shortages and potential solutions.
Absolutely. And finally, in the Faroe Islands, we learned about the nearing completion of a major tunnel project, the persistent patient safety concerns in the healthcare system, and the new collective agreement for health workers.
Three very different places facing their own unique challenges.
It's fascinating to see how they're all navigating these political, economic, and social changes.
Definitely makes you think about the interconnectedness of these North Atlantic communities.
It does. Sources are linked below.